not miss the Camellia Show Spectacular now at Bob Wine's Camellia Gardens in Ocala.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Just about 10 minutes after 11 o'clock. Thank you for waiting. We had fun with the last interview, but we took some time away from our next guest. Buddy Levy is our next guest. He is on the phone. His book is called Labyrinth of Ice, and it is a really good book. I'm not the only one saying that. Lots of great, reviews on Amazon. Labyrinth of Ice, the triumphant and tragic Greeley Polar Expedition. Buddy is an historian, a researcher. He was the co-star of the History Channel's docuseries called Brad Meltzer's Decoded. He's an on-camera expert on the 4-part television series The Frontiersmen, The Men Who Built America. He's a TEDx speaker. He was featured in the New York Times, USA Today, The Wall Street Journal. You get the picture, right? Lots of very impressive credentials. Buddy Levy, I apologize for making you wait through that, and good morning.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And where are you? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Idaho in the snow and thinking about y'all in Florida with a little more warmth.
But your story takes place in the cold parts of the world, right?
Yeah, it's a really good winter read for if you want to just curl up with your blanket and a hot toddy and think about how gnarly it was in 1881 near the North Pole.
So the book just came out, and it's already #1 on a few different lists. How exciting is that?
It's been greatly received. I'm so thrilled. It was a really, really fun and difficult project, but I think the story is so riveting that readers are responding to that. It's quite harrowing.
So this takes place in 1881, and although it's July, it's still freezing cold, right?
Yeah, the polar regions don't give you much respite. There's 2 months of open water, and then the rest of the year it's still locked in ice and snow and wind and sleet and icebergs.
So was Lieutenant Greeley, was he on a mission that was sanctioned by some government, or was it a private thing? Why was he doing what he did?
That's a great question. So this is an Army expedition that was, it had essentially 3 goals. The first was to set up a scientific research station that was part of this global consortium, which is really visionary. So they were the northernmost inhabitants in the world at the time, and they had set up a fort. They unloaded a 200-foot steamship near the top of Ellesmere Island, Canada, and Greenland, and built this 65-foot long fort. And so they were to take scientific readings for a couple of years, and then they were also, Greeley's secret mission was to try to reach the North Pole or get as farther north than anyone had ever been. And then they were also supposed to look for this missing U.S. ship called the Jeannette that had been gone since 1879, and no one knew where it had gone, and it was vanished. So that was their primary function, but it was a military expedition sanctioned by the U.S. Army.
So think about back in those days. I mean, we had no overhead photos, obviously. We had really no comprehension of what they were going to find. Was there anything that was expected that didn't happen, or that happened unexpectedly? Maybe it's a better way to ask that.
Well, yeah, much happened unexpectedly, but I will say that what was really fascinating to me is even, in 1881, no one had been to the North Pole, and so there was a great deal of mystique and mystery and guesswork going on about what was up there. In fact, there were some erroneous polar maps that had been created that suggested that once you broke through this ring of ice, that there was this open polar sea that was devoid of ice and that was actually tropical. And of course, that proved not to be correct. But at the time, Greeley and his men were embarking on something that I think would be akin to going to the moon. No one had ever been there. It was this great unknown.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, what's really amazing about this is that there are also photographs.
That's right. And so Greeley brought along this man named George Rice from Canada who he surfaces in the book in many, many ways as a great hero. But he also took there were hundreds of photographic plates, but there are some 40 or 50 images, and you get a really good idea of what it was like there. I mean, the images are striking. You get a sense of the scale and scope of this vast landscape, as well as the fort that they built, the wildlife that's up there, and you can really get a feeling beyond just the description and the written word of what they encountered.
So what did we learn from the missions? Is that too big of a question? Is there too much to answer there?
Well, no. I mean, I'll give you kind of a thumbnail sketch. A lot. So Greeley, first of all, they went farther north than anyone had ever been, and so they were exploring new regions of Canada and Greenland, and were able to report back with great detail and accuracy because Greeley and his men took incredible records, and I mean thousands and thousands of pages of diary and also official reportage, and so we learn about what flora and fauna exist up there. Greeley also was really remarkable. So there's this thing called the polar night that happens where the sun sets at that latitude in mid-October, and doesn't rise again until February. So it's essentially twilight for 4 months. And Greeley did great work studying what happens to people in polar darkness, where they're confined for months on end. And so he was really, without completely knowing it, he was doing research on depression, anxiety, and cabin fever, polar madness, as well. And he was really great at figuring out ways to keep men interested. So he set up a kind of 3 days a week school. He had lecture series. They had competitions on foot races and dog sled races. And then there's a whole bunch of science, thousands of pages of science studying magnetism, polar drift, temperatures up there. Then can use it all now as a baseline to study climate.
Mm-hmm. But there was also self-protection, though, because when they set up things to study everything, they had the wild animals out there.
Well, right, and so at the beginning of the adventure, it's essentially 1881 to 1884, and it's sort of broken into two parts. The time that they're at Fort Conger, where they had built this longhouse, and it's they've got a structure with heat and comfort, even though outside it's 100 below zero at times and 100-mile-an-hour winds. And they're also being periodically attacked by wolves. They're having to contend with the pesky polar bears breaking into their stores. And then they're dealing with the sort of their own kind of dramas of infighting and mutiny and insurrection that happen. There's a lot going on all the time.
Gosh. So the Army's reason for sending them was strategic as far as like military needs. It had nothing to do with like Christopher Columbus looking for riches or spices. It was completely a way to get to another part of the world. Am I right about that? It was just a different...
Well, they weren't actually setting up a military base. It was more of a scientific base. But the U.S. Army was the one who were the patrons or sanctioning the expedition. And so it was really about knowledge ultimately. And it's interesting because some researchers and historians have, looked at this and said, well, of course something's going to go wrong. You've got Army men doing nautical things, and that is a bit of a conundrum. And ultimately, the Navy is brought to bear on this expedition, because they're better suited to be moving through ice-strewn waters.
How much time passes in the reading of the book from the first page to the last page? How many years?
Essentially 3 years.
Wow.
Were they totally cut off from communication with their families, or did they have many ways of letters going back and forth?
Wow, that's a great question. So the plan, they're writing letters constantly, but the plan is when they originally are left off at Fort Conger, what they build, the ships that leaves them there sails away, and they watch it depart, and they're thinking, it's supposed to come back in a year, at which point they'll give that resupply ship letters for their families. And though, because of different factors, the first resupply ship doesn't make it. So you've got the men are continually writing, but they're not able to send them. But I'm glad you brought that up, because there's this really elaborate system in the polar north at that time called Arctic post offices, and so they would have these predestined spots where they would be islands or promontories on the coast where they would set up cairns, huge piles of stones under which they would place crates or containers that had important letters and military orders, and it was a way that ships could find out where people were or where they had been.
Oh my gosh! Wow, it's ingenious, isn't it, in a way? But it's scary that you have to depend on that.
Well, right, and also it becomes a really important factor in the book, because at certain times when these resupply missions are supposed to be dropping things off for Greeley and his men, they encounter problems of their own, the resupply missions, and so they have to leave some rather grim news in these cairns that Greeley and his men subsequently find. And at times it's just incredibly moving, because what they're finding is that the that was meant to be left for them isn't there. And so now they realize, okay, we've got 8 months to live on 2-month rations. What are we going to do?
Oh my gosh. Oh wow.
So you said that the men were even inclined toward cannibalism.
Well, it's debated hotly what exactly happened, and you have to sort of get into it down to at a certain point they're on this spit that's 250 miles from where they left Fort Conger to it's south of there, and it's this arduous journey that they've taken to get there, and they've cobbled out these sort of dwellings in rock and using their remaining boats for roofs and canvas sides, and it's really quite sparse. And they do an amazing job of finding food and hunting and building these shrimp nets that they can catch shrimp in the bay. But at a certain point, there's the issue of how they're going to survive, and we don't really learn about it in real time. It's revealed sort of after the fact, and it's pretty compelling what ends up happening.
Your book is natural drama based on real facts. Since you were friends with the Hemingways, did some of Ernest's writings creep into your style?
That's true. I grew up in Sun Valley, Idaho, the place where Ernest Hemingway ended his life, and I was my father was a big Hemingway fan, and I grew up with some of the Hemingway's grandchildren, and so at a very young age I was reading all of Hemingway and all of like Jack London's adventure narrative. So I've been drawn to the outdoors and adventure in my writing all my life.
Oh, really? So as a writer, does writing a true story like this spark some kind of an idea for a fictional story in the future?
Yeah, but I have to say, I mean, you listed some of my works. There's quite enough drama in real life to sustain me, I think, for the rest of my career. That you just kind of bump into these stories and you say, how the heck has that been told or told well or told right? And these stories are, they're just profound in many ways.
Yeah, and just to tell the audience, you do have a number of books that would be interesting to this listening audience. A book on is it Geronimo? Did you write a book on Geronimo? Am I looking at the wrong thing here?
I did write a book on Geronimo with Coach Mike Leach, who's somewhat notorious and legendary. And he's a football coach. It's a leadership book. But, I have to say that, these adventure narratives, so I wrote a book about the first Europeans to descend the entire length of the Amazon, and I wrote about the conquest of Mexico with Cortez and Montezuma's fateful meeting in what is now Mexico City. But this most recent one I'd say is more in my wheelhouse because I grew up in a mountain town that is snowbound for the entire winter, and I spent a lot of time in the outdoors hunting and fishing, and have been in 30 below weather, and it gave me a small sense, but I would say not. It's hard to imagine what it's like at nearly 100 below with gale force winds floating on an iceberg. But I did travel to Greenland some time ago, and it moving around in that landscape, trekking and kayaking in the fjords gave me at least some taste of what it might have been like for these men. I would never claim that I can really know exactly what it was like.
How did Greeley's wife garner enough respect to have a rescue mission instilled? Because back then it seems like women weren't paid attention to.
That is a really great question. Henrietta Greeley is a very large part of this story, and so I move back and forth between where the men, Greeley and his men are, and what they're doing, and then Henrietta's tireless efforts back in the States to get the U.S. government to act and to function and go send these rescue missions. And she is very well connected with the U.S. newspapers around the country, and she starts a kind of grassroots campaign to have editorial letters written. It was well known at the time that polar expeditions, the crew losses were average of 50%. So she well knew the dangers that her husband was in, and she is just tireless in writing letters, writing to government, having prominent people that she knows, have meetings, all the way up to the highest levels of the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, and even the presidency, and saying, look, we sent these men there. We have to go get them.
The book is called Labyrinth of Ice, The Triumphant and Tragic Greeley Polar Expedition. It's written by our guest, Buddy Levy. It's #1 in the Maritime History and Piracy section, or whatever, on Amazon section? Category, that's the word. And #2 in the Arctic and Antarctic history. #1 in Maritime History and Piracy. And #2 in Expeditions and Discoveries. How did you do the research for this? I mean, what did you speak to people? Was it somehow archived in a library somewhere?
Well, so the Greeley expedition, because it was initially a science expedition, Greeley was meticulous in keeping literally thousands of pages of records. And I've always marveled at their ability to, he'd be up late at night under a lantern or candlelight with his hands freezing, scribbling in the ink freezing, scribbling these notes and details. But many of the men kept journals and diaries. Greeley kept journals and diaries and official reports, and they were also writing, as I said, letters back home. And so when Greeley strikes out from Fort Conger to depart, there's this great scene where they have to decide, okay, what are we going to do with all the scientific records, and this stuff is heavy, and they're going to be moving in these small craft, and they all agree that their record not be lost to them, because if they end up sinking in the ocean, then it'll all be lost. So they keep it in these crates and boxes, and they're dragging it along with sleds, and there's a wealth of information, and it's so detailed. That's the thing that really was helpful, is that you can know on a given date what the temperature was and what the wind speeds were, whether it was snowing or sleeting, and it's so helpful to have that, because most of, as I said, many polar expeditions, were lost or didn't. They were just trying to save their own lives, and they weren't attended to bringing the information back.
Wow, so fascinating.
And that's one of the amazing things about this expedition, because when Greeley said he was going on this expedition, and he had to have people along with him to be able to accomplish his mission, some of those people must have realized that they weren't going to come home, that they might die.
Yeah, I mean, I would align it or make it akin to, say, space travel. When the astronauts are incredibly brave, and these men were incredibly brave, knowing that it was questionable whether they would ever return. And so you have to look at what their motivations were. I mean, certainly there's a kind of patriotism to it. They were trying to break the record of farthest north, which had been held by the British for 300 years, and there's a nationalism to that. And also discovery, you know, the idea that we're going to go someplace no one has ever been, and sometimes that in and of itself, as in with space travel, is enough to fire the imaginations of brave people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, buddy, what a fascinating story you've told, and obviously it's being loved by everybody who's getting it. You sent us a copy of the book, so I'd like to give it away to one of our listeners. If somebody out there would like the book, you need to call right now, 622-9622. I'll pick one call at random and give it away. Leave it here for you to pick up. I found it on Amazon. Do you have a website, buddy?
Yeah, I do. Just www.buddylevy.com.
All right, very good.
BUDDYLEVY. Yep.
Okay, very good. Buddy, thank you again for being on the air with us today. Good luck with everything.
Hey, my great pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Health Alert Ocala residents. How would you like to feel better and become a healthier person just by going to sleep at night? This is all made possible and affordable at Mostly Mattress, located on Highway 200, across the street from Hobby Lobby in Ocala. Mostly Mattress beats all competitor prices and offers free delivery of your new sleep solution. All the brand names, and it's an adjustable bed heaven. Mostly Mattress, located on Highway 200, across the street from Hobby Lobby. Mostly Mattress is in Ocala, folks. Mostly Mattress is where your feel better begins.
It's the final liquidation blowout going on now at the Cyrus Rug Gallery in downtown Ocala. After 35 years, Cyrus is retiring and everything must go. Save 60 to 70% on every rug in stock, and we have thousands to choose from. Full room rugs, runners, rounds, we have them. Come by early for the best selection, because when they're gone forever. The Cyrus Rug Gallery liquidation sale going on now, where you'll save 60 to 70% on every rug in stock. For more information, call them at 629-3200. That's 629-3200.
Veterans Helping Veterans USA. Call 352-433-2320. We help veterans and their families with limited financial assistance, counseling, employment referrals, and a food and clothing bank. You can help in making a huge difference in the veterans' lives we serve by donating food, clothing, household items, or direct financial assistance. All donations are tax deductible. Veterans Helping Veterans USA. 352-433-2320. Thank you for your attention, and God bless America.
Here are today's headlines from The Source, WOCA. One person is dead and another is hurt after a house caught fire in Ocala around 3 p.m. yesterday. Ocala Fire Rescue responded to a fire at a home at the Arbors of Ocala Mobile Home Park at 2250